Welcome to the Magento Product Uploader. You can simply start by signing in with your email and password. Welcome to the main dashboard, where you can sign out to the top right. As an administrator, you can actually update settings. This is how you actually connect to your specific Magento website instance. You can configure the settings. It's very configurable. You can set the base URL, which is where your Magento website's REST API is located. If you noted, it's the website URL, typically followed by REST. However, this can be configured by your Magento instance. You want to include the credentials for your admin or a user who has access to utilize your API, so you can enter the username and a password. Typically, the authentication endpoint is located here. However, based on your Magento instance, you can actually configure the authentication endpoint. Check your documentation. The authentication token catch actually helps you to specify whether it's actually enabled or not. So it's a 1 or 0 value. Of course, you can actually edit any setting by clicking on the pencil and putting in a value and then clicking save. How long would you like the token or a login session with your Magento API to be? Typically 60 minutes is very helpful. Is SSL enabled on your Magento website? So if it's enabled, so if you're seeing it's HTTP here, if you have test instance, then you might not enable it. So you can actually change this to 1 if it's enabled or 0 if not. The base URL. So if it is that you are actually getting merchants, so if it's configurable to actually have merchants in your Magento store, you can actually pull from there as well. If you notice, the base URL is the same thing as the authentication URL. Typically they're the same. However, there's some configuration options that some users use to pull from different Magento instances. Typically, you can actually leave the defaults. What's really important is that you configure the auth options. You notice you can actually search as well. The catch, expiration, and the catch use is the same. You can actually specify where you'd like to get and list. Now, if you notice, this configuration is using merchants and the attribute, product attribute. And so they're actually pulling from that endpoint URL and listing it. This is actually utilized to get one record, and this is actually utilized to get multiple records. Again, this is based on your Magento configuration, but again, general. The search criteria. So we typically, what happens is that we pull over a certain amount of records from your Magento instance. So typically you want to start at the first page and you can pull over 10 records at a time. If you'd like to pull over 100 records when you're actually searching, and that is when we get to the product section, then you can actually change this 10 to 100. Again, more merchant configuration. So if you want to see anything related to merchants, use Magento_merchants. Product categories. If your products are actually in categories, you can actually pull that. Of course, it's the same thing. So you want to keep the base URL the same. So that's the actual website followed by REST. And you can actually change that. So it means you can actually pull your product categories from a different website, especially when like migrating. It gives you that quite a bit of flexibility. So you can pull from one website and then publish to another, depending on how you actually configure this. But typically everything is actually the same website, which is your Magento website URL and followed by REST. The endpoint is typically categories list. Of course, you can change this to V1, V2, but this you can actually just check your documentation, the expiration, and the catch use, whether it's actually utilizing the catch. So the catch really will actually make the product uploader work faster. So instead of actually pulling from your Magento website each time it's pulling data, it will actually save that data for a period of time. So for example, your categories might not be updated that frequently, so you can actually keep that for a longer period, which is why the catch expiration is a bit longer here. Of course, this is pulling in 40 categories at a time, and when you authenticate with this endpoint, SSL has been disabled, so you can actually enable it as well. When working with products, let's filter for products. So we're going to show all the settings and we filter for products. So these are our product settings, and again, we can specify the actual API endpoint, how long it should expire, where do we get this from. So typically this is standard. Typically you want to update the URL to include SKU, so the product uploader will know where to put SKU in the REST API endpoint, and it allows you to actually add and update products, so the different endpoints. So what's happening is that it's getting the base URL and then appending to the end the respective suffix to get the get endpoint. Of course, you can verify SIL or not. You can add new settings as well. They invalidate Magento authentication. So what happens is that when you actually connect to Magento and sign in from the product uploader, it stores a session. And if you'd like to disable that session or clear that session, so you're having some issues or you change your password or you're unable to connect, first thing you want to do is just invalidate the Magento authentication. And also you can clear the application cache, which is if it has any products and categories that have been kept too long and it's not being updated, you can clear that. So it's pretty easy to self-manage. So this is the application settings. Thank you.